You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is March 7th, 2024. It's 7:35 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And what I thought I would talk about is the longer view of practice. I know that at Mettagroup, we're kind of centered on the preliminary practices around attachment repair, but there is the longer view of classical enlightenment. Since we mainly are focused on the Theravada teachings, that's a four-path model and goes through different stages to get there. Being Western practitioners and being, how does one say this in a kind way? Instant experts at everything we look at, even tangentially. We tend to think that 100,000 prostrations or all of the preliminary practices that are stacked up for people who practice in other parts of the world are simply unnecessary. We are so capable as a people that we can just go right into the advanced part without the beginning and the middle. This tends to produce a very light practice for most people because they can't really understand the subtleties that are being suggested as subjects for investigation. What I noticed in teaching in meditation centers, that there was a big distinction between people who routinely went on retreats and people who didn't go on retreats. People who went on retreats developed a level of concentration that was necessary to really begin to explore the insights that meditation is meant to produce. And people who didn't go on retreats often didn't develop a level of concentration where they could get into the meditative states that would offer them the insights that lead to a deepening of the practice and also ultimately to liberation. If we were to talk about liberation, what would that mean? I know when I came into practice, what I thought it meant was that I would have no more problems, but that actually isn't what happens. I would never have another problem again. I would not suffer at all in anything that I did. Was my idea of liberation. So, there's some allowance for being young and dumb, but I think that the real answer is that you see the human condition for what it is, and you're able to navigate that without wanting it to be different than that. So that's an interesting thing. I think that culturally, we're not really organized around trying to understand what the conditioning is. We're trying to understand the nature of the culture that we're in, the nature of the social hierarchy, and in some ways compete in that frame. What you learn quite early on, if you try to do that, is that it's not a level playing field, and that some people are distinctly advantaged and other people are distinctly disadvantaged. And if you can see that, then of course the accomplishments are less meaningful because they're not, it isn't really a hierarchy that's merit-based. And I think that it doesn't take much to see that in terms of clarity. I think also one of the things that, particularly in the West, that we like to do is exclude from awareness as much as possible the temporary nature of the human condition. That we're born, we grow old, we get sick, and we die is not something that it's routinely expressed. And actually, we don't get that much help in to integrate that kind of experiences so that we can actually figure out what is valuable and what isn't valuable. So we don't spend so much time pursuing things that actually, in the end, won't help us accommodate this. So I think that really what we know mostly about life is, and most of the instruction we get is around what's valuable in our culture. And it is relentless with all of the, it's almost like an automation of the presentation of this. It's everywhere, it's constant. And I think that if you get too hooked into it, very dissatisfying. Of course, that's not who comes for meditation practice, really. If you're, I think of it as a kind of bell curve. At one end are people that don't function very well, and then there's everybody in the middle. And at the other extreme are people that function really well and get most of the things that are available in our culture, but don't find that satisfying, meaningful. So maybe as meditation becomes more mainstream, there's more diversity there, but it still seems like that. People who come because they've looked through the various offerings of the culture to relieve a sense of suffering that they haven't found that relief, and then turn toward a sense of what is beyond those cultural constraints, cultural offerings. At what point in your life did you notice that your perception of the ordinary competition of life was actually not engaging enough for you, so that you looked for something else? We talk about the attachment stuff here because, and we talk about it as the preliminary practices because often the conditioning, that early conditioning of childhood, and the way that we develop a sense of ourselves and also of what the world has to offer us, can become quite rigid. In Buddhism, we would call it a limiting belief or a fixed view. And when you attempt to enter into a meditation practice that leads to these deep insights about the nature of the human condition, these limiting beliefs or these fixed views can interfere with that progress to the point that you aren't able to make enough progress, that the frustration of not making progress takes you out of the willingness to practice. For those of us with attachment disturbances, one of the things that accumulates over time is we're not able to engage in a meaningful life is the disappointment of that. And if you're not particularly a strong mentalizer, which is often the case of people at the disorganized end of attachment distribution, you don't understand why that is. You look at yourself and you look at other people, and in an ordinary comparison, you stack up okay, but at the same time, other people who are able to do better, to find relationships that work better, to find work in our culture that's more satisfying to them, and that confusion is also something that we can become quite averse to. So when we talk about then preliminary practices, what we're really talking about is the development of mentalization, the development of emotional regulation, so that this lack of mentalizing and emotional regulation doesn't interfere with the depth that you can go in the practice so that you can get into the territories of investigation. Well, you'll see the nature of the way that we create the experience of reality that we have. In a poor mentalizing scenario, you think that your perception of the way things are is actually a fairly accurate rendition of it. And so that the meaning that you assign to it then can be universalized to everyone having an experience similar to what you're experiencing. We would call that non-mentalizing. And when you see more clearly, what you see is that actually the way that you create the experience of reality is based on the way things mean, in the way that those experiences mean something to you. And the way that that happens is through the experiences of life over and over again, being collected in this perceptual database of experiences. That you have the capacity to sense. We have in Buddhism 6 senses: touching, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and mind. In the West, we don't have mind in the same way. Mind is the thing that focuses your attention on different sensing experiences out of the range of sensing experiences that are available, so that you collect these mind moments. Then you define these mind moments based on previous experience or through the use of imagination. And in defining this string of mind moments, weave together an experience of the present moment in conceptual reality. But it isn't what's happening, it's what is happening means to us. So there's a distinction between that. And that's actually what we want to be able to investigate in our meditation practice, to see moment by moment these experiences of sensing arising and then the meaning that we associate with them. Because we operate in this arena of what things mean, rather than what's happening, we, as practice deepens, understand that everybody's perceiving the present moment in a different way because everybody's conditioning is different. And so we don't have a stance of this is what's happening. We have a stance of this is what is happening means to us. And because we understand the nature of the defining of that, you are necessarily having a different experience than I am having. And so the openness to say, this is what I think is going on, what do you think is going on, then is the thing that opens the possibility of intimacy. And also a depth of understanding, because you get a perspective that is very different. I would call that the different facets on the jewel of the Dharma, these different perspectives, that if you can create a space where it's safe for somebody else to express them in a very open and vulnerable way, you get a whole different take on the experience of what's happening, which creates a depth that you on your own aren't likely to be able to find. So the first piece is really this development of concentration. In the Mettagroup formulation of this, we use heart practices as a way of developing high concentration states, because it also illustrates for us what a mind state or a view is. Ultimate reality is then shaped into conceptual reality. There's a siren on. You may not be able to hear it, but it's loud enough that it's interfering with my thinking. Hopefully, it's not this building that's on fire. You concentrate well enough, then you can watch all of this unfold moment by moment. And this is a very different idea than what we're trained with in our culture. This idea that we pay attention to things in the environment that mean something to us, and we ignore everything else. And then we gather these little mind moments and assemble a conceptual reality, a meaning from that, this appearance of solidness, not from a general survey of what's happening, but from this highly curated selection of what preferences that we have. And that's all conditioned. Our previous experiences and the meaning that we've assigned. So the first exploration, once you get enough concentration, is to watch each of the sense gates grabbing these little mind moments. So, nama rupa is the Pali for that first stage. The mind and the body. So understanding the mind is curating the selection of sensing experiences, and then what the sensing experiences are, unfixated, undifferentiated, no meaning assigned, and then they're evaluated for urgency. Does it need immediate attention? Does it not matter whether we get to it? Is there time for a pleasant experience? And that creates the cue for processing and assigning meaning. And then it's compared to the perceptual database. And if there's a meaning close enough, that meaning is assigned, and that undifferentiated, unfixated, without awareness of the self-experience, unfolds into conceptual reality, which the self-experience knows. Is that making sense? So what we want to be able to do is watch that process happen, but we watch it from the self, not from the unconscious process of making that. So most of the time when we experience something, that whole process is complete and the meaning is already assigned to it. And so we're reflecting on the meaning that we've assigned. Only when you have a sensing experience which is novel, where the mind can't easily assign meaning to it, and it lasts longer than a half a second, do we sometimes have the capacity to witness that process from the self-experience. Have you ever heard a sound, for instance, that you didn't know what it was, and you noticed the mind trying on one meaning after another till you find one that seems to fit, and then it becomes that, unless there's more evidence, and then it becomes something else. That's the whole process that happens pretty much with every experience. But most of the time it happens faster than a half a second, and so we don't see that process. That second piece is conditionality, that the attention that we pay to in this moment sets up the experience of the next moment. So where our attention is often has an effect on where our attention can go next. In meditation, when you're sitting there, have you noticed that you'll be focused on a particular object, and then in the background or the periphery, other objects that you might focus on arise, and then your attention moves from the object you're currently focused on to another object? Or is it sudden? Are you sitting there and it's relatively quiet and there's a loud noise, and then you're not at the object that you were, you're at the sound that you're hearing? And then when you really get into exploring this, you hear the sound of a bird chirping. How did you get to the place where it's a bird chirping? And then in visual thinking experience, there's an image of a bird in a location chirping. But is that the bird that's currently chirping, or is that the previously experienced bird that then is creating the experience of identification? Maybe you're good with bird chirp, so you're able to tell one from another. This is a chickadee, that's a robin. And so the image that's associated with that sound becomes a robin instead of a, 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 a wren. But what you might notice is that the visual representation of that, if you can't see the bird currently, is a past version of that bird. And then what unfolds from that is a series of meanings of what it was like in the past of hearing that. And then the present moment is both the experience of hearing the sound of the bird that's currently chirping and all of the meaning that's been associated with that kind of experience in the past, all creating the richness of the present moment. And can you keep those all fairly distinct so that you know that this is the present moment? And the other stuff are really commentary on that, moment by moment. Then we move into an exploration of the characteristics. This is the self experience. This is the experience of impermanence. And then the broader experience of the nature of the human condition, birth, life, old age, sickness, and death. It's very hard to conceive of one not going on forever. And the younger you are, the harder it is to conceive of this. The older you are, of course, it gets more and more apparent because the changes in the body are startling. But for the first 30 years of life, you're growing and it just seems to be getting better. It's just getting better. It's just getting better. And then you get into that adult period where it's fairly stable. The movements are quite slow. And then you get into your mid 50s and it's like stepping on the accelerator of aging. It's quite surprising what can happen. So, as we like to say, genetics minus lifestyle equals lifespan. How good at taking care of yourself were you over the course of time? It has broader implications, that sense of it. What happens to us when we die? What then in this short, precious life that we have is really worth our attention? What is it that really matters to us? That's the urgent question. What is the source of meaning for us? And can we organize our life in such a way that most of the time is spent on the pursuit of that meaning? And then what you might be stunned by is that the sources of meaning, and particularly the sources of meaning for you, often have no cultural value and are not rewarded. And so there's an existential dilemma that arises often, which is, am I doing the right thing in pursuing the things that are meaningful, the things that seem to really be of value, when our culture doesn't really value them? That's always the puzzle. So the nature of self and not self. I like to say the self experience, the conscious self experience is the audience of you. Or you might say it's the veto of you. The whole unconscious body-mind process creates the perception of what's happening, what you should do in response to it, and actually begins the process of responding by the time you have conscious awareness of it in the self. And in that moment, just as you're about to take the action, if you see in the conscious experience of that it's not a good idea, you can hit the veto button and stop the action from happening. But if you're not present for that process, you just take the action. And then you have the consequence to to deal with. So that mindfulness piece where you're really attending to the present moment gives you this great freedom to interrupt unskillful action in a way that if you're not mindful, you can't you, you can't interrupt it. The less, of course, you can mentalize, the less present you can be, the more often you're going to just be reacting to the conditioning that you experience. In each moment, what opens up is every possibility that you could take in this moment, all of them. But if you can't understand what those choices are, they're not really something that you can choose. One of the things about the habit of choosing without that mindful, present experiences that you tend to pick the ones that are clearly available to you. And the ones that take more exploration, you don't choose over and over again until they become ruts, they become samsara. Impermanence is both at a micro level, the individual's sensing experience, every single sensing experience at the smallest level comes and goes, nothing lasts. And then at a macro scale, nothing lasts either. Relationships don't last, circumstances don't last, time doesn't last, nothing lasts. And how do you find a way to balance in that experience of unrelenting change? And that capacity to balance really is the thing that seeing clearly the nature of it offers. And then, of course, the whole formulation of things being solid is also not really what's happening. And if you allow that energetic process to unfold, the barrier between inside and outside dissolves, and you're just energy experiencing. But that still isn't really enough to be freeing. Seeing the nature of how you assign meaning to every little thing and seeing the confinement of that is one of the things that we need to know, to let go of the belief that there is a centering, organizing, solid, continuous, unchanging self-experience, and knowing that in each moment it simply arises based on conditions, and when the conditions change, that version passes away and another version arises in its place. The suffering comes from wanting that to be different or clinging to a particular version of the sense of self that you prefer over other versions of the sense of self. I think that it is a good thing, an organizing thing, a way of understanding our relationship to other people and being able to communicate freely with other people. But beyond that, it isn't unchanging, it isn't constant. But think about it. When you think of yourself at 5 years old, you're thinking it's the same person, right? That was me when I was 5. And you can think about it and you think, oh, yeah, that was me. I recognize that. But actually, it was years ago and you were in an entirely different body and your capacity to think and to experience was completely different. And you really can't come into the nature of what that 5-year-old experience was. You don't have the equipment for it anymore. The whole way that the brain worked then is different than the way that an adult brain works. It's just not comparable, but it's very easy to create the illusion that, oh yeah, I remember when I was 5 and I remember what I was thinking and doing and how I was making things happen. The impermanence piece is the investigation is for the self is find the permanent location of the self, which the correct answer is you can't find. And then with impermanence, find the thing that is unchanging. in your body. Find the thing that is the same as it's always been over the course of your life. The correct answer is you can't. And then understanding the nature of the body as a living thing, growing, aging, that ultimately it won't survive. Have you had the experience of death yet? That's also something that's quite illustrative in a way that helps understand this, but also sometimes quite confusing. Not here anymore, not here anymore, not here anymore. And yet the body mind can create the experience of them, the remembrance of them. The second one is that the second aspect of that is sometimes you get what you want, but then you lose it because everything is impermanent. There's no way to hold on to anything. So even though you work towards something and you get it, you can't hold on to it. Certain kind of suffering in that. Sometimes you can't get what you want. Even if you work at it, you can't get it. That's also another kind of suffering. And then sometimes things happen that you don't want to have happen. That's another kind of suffering that comes in the nature of this human conditioning. Oscar Wilde said, there are only two great tragedies in life. One is not getting what you want, and the other is getting it. So there was some understanding of that. Sometimes you get what you want, but you lose it. It's a terrible thing. Sometimes you can't get what you want. It's a terrible thing. Sometimes things happen that you don't want, and that's also a terrible thing. And then the last aspect of that is the constant ongoing irritation that nothing is exactly the way that you would have it if you were actually in charge of anything, which is also terrible. You're not in charge. How did that happen? It's not what I want. But then how do you integrate that? How do you allow that to turn this life into this energetic experience and then work through these attachments? You have these ways of clinging. Dan Brown used to call it grab. You grab onto these things and you won't let go of them. And that's the thing that drives the suffering. Whereas if you just opened, there was a movie I'm thinking about with Rosie. Oh, geez, I'm so bad at remembering these kinds of details about a plane crash, and one of the actors loses a baby, and her lament is that if she just held on tighter, the baby would still be alive. And so the hero puts her in the back seat with a uh, toolkit and says, "Hold on as tight as you can," and then he drives the car into a wall. And the toolkit pulls out of her arms, even though she's holding on as tightly as she can. And the insight in that, of course, is you can't hold on. And there's such freedom in understanding that yes, in each moment as it comes, just take it. Take it as fully as you can, engage as fully as you can, knowing that it's going to come and go, like everything is going to come and go. The defense against that, of course, is not accepting anything, resisting everything, not allowing the experience of everything in the belief that you'll save yourself from the suffering of losing it. But you'd lose it either way. What you're saving yourself from is not having the experience of it while you could have the experience of it. So you really need to go into it. In the Theravada model of practice, and you do tend to have the insights that are related to the kind of practice you do. So if you practice in a Theravada way, the insights that arise tend to fall into their map. And if you practice in the different Tibetan lineages, the practices that you do illustrate the map that they offer. In the Theravada map, stream entry is the first big cessation experience. And so when we talk about cessation, what we mean is that the consciousness, the self-consciousness experience ends. So you see even that coming and going. You in those moments, you recognize the possibility, the first time probably, that something big could happen. And then you recognize that something big is happening, and then there's nothing. And then slowly, the different sense gates reactivate. You hear sound, but there's nothing else. There's no person experiencing sound. And then you experience light, but it's just light and sound. There's no fixation, there's no meaning attached to it. And then the sense of self arises, and it's this unlanguaged, unfixated, enlightened sense of self, which is light and sound. And then you're in this space, complete freedom. And then the limited identity reattaches, and you see this sudden shrinking down into this confining stack of beliefs. And in that moment, you see unquestionably the nature of the human conditioning being these confining beliefs that we have. And when you can move easily from that liberated sense of self that is unlimited, and this casket, I should say, of limiting beliefs, that would be liberation. And you see clearly the nature of this, the perception of what is sacred, which then reorients you in a very profound way away from the lightness of cultural meaning, more toward that sense of the sacred. But in the Theravada model, stream entry is not fully liberated, and we really have the process of eliminating the 10 fetters. That's our map. So the stream entry experience relieves the first 3 of the 10 fetters. So belief in religious ceremony being the same as insight into the nature of things, relieved of the sense in the relief from the belief in the solid, unchanging self experience, and then also release from the hindrance of doubt. And skeptical doubt in the Buddhist sense is really narrowly confined to believing that these practices will lead to the insights of liberation. The second path, and this is also tied to reincarnation. So you have karma and reincarnation, these central beliefs. A stream enter is said to be reincarnated 7 more times, so 7 more lifetimes in order to work through the rest. A second path, or it's called a once returner, because they come back, or you're reincarnated. It'll take 1 more reincarnation to get there, because the second path is the weakening of craving and aversion. What I noticed in that first path is coming out in an insanely heightened sense of the craving and aversion, mainly around the experience of the bliss that was associated with it. Um, and so then you work at the grasping, the grabbing around all sensing experiences, and that lust for the blissfulness of that. You get through that, and in the Theravada model, of course, that would be a second experience of cessation, or perhaps more than just a single other experience, because there is an aspect where you know whether you've taken an additional path or you haven't, coming out of the cessation experience. The third path is a non-returner. That's where you uh, eradicate craving and aversion, and then what's left are the remaining 5 fetters of restlessness and agitation, terrible with lists. Let's see if I can remember it. Sloth and torpor, conceit, that would be an arahat. These are quite rare, I think. Not sure I've met one in all of my practicing in different places, but also maybe not so necessary in our own lives, in the way that we move through this. So in the beginning, really, it's organizing practice so that you can remove the obstacles that would prevent you from then being able to see the pursuit of this as meaningful enough that you would organize your life in such a way that you would devote the time, energy, and resources that are necessary in order to move in this direction, and then practicing in such a way that that arises. That making sense in as a description of what we're doing here? And then you can just be in this marvelous thing that we have. So what do you say we do some practice? Um, since I've been mostly talking about seeing things, why don't we do some insight practice? We'll do some concentration practice to begin, just to settle the mind, and then move into see, hear, feel cascade to see if we can look at the different things that are we point at. So go ahead and take your meditation postures. The sound canceling software filters out all bell sounds, so I'll just tell you when the period is beginning and ending. How'd that go? Well, it wasn't good. It means it was good for something. So what's happening? In April, we're going to do a level 1 series 4 Saturday mornings from 9 to 1. If you're interested in the attachment, an introduction to the attachment material, that's going to be coming up. I'm going to do a 2-week residential retreat in Poland from May 11th until May 25th. I'm going to do a 4-day non-residential retreat in Utrecht. I think the 28th of May through the 1st of June. If you're interested in that, there's only 2 spots left in the Poland retreat, so there's a waiting list on our website for that. And then That's with Phil Jordan's community. So if Phil is also one of your teachers, you could maybe get in through there. The Utrecht retreat is open. We're going to do, for the first time, a meditation and addiction level 2 class, which is going to start in July. And that's going to be a 12-week class that will meet 3 times a week for an hour. So 6 to 7, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We'll do a didactic on a Monday, meditation instruction on Wednesday, and some relational practice on Friday for 6 weeks, covering our approach to that. I'm kind of excited about that because it's a program that we did quite a bit in rehabs, but we haven't really found a way to engage an audience outside. So we're going to try this and see how it works. We will begin some new level 2 classes after I get back from Europe. That gives us pretty much the next 6 or so months of what's going on around here. You can find all of that information on the website. We're also going to put out an entirely new website in the next week or so, so that it's been in the works for a few months. So thank you for your practice. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming and participating in this. I offer the teaching freely, but if you are resourced and can make a donation, I hope you will consider it. There's a link on the website to do that. It helps support me and also the work that Mettagroup is doing. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you soon.